bit about, people think that it's just equipment, right? And that, well, your equipment is, you're the underdog because your equipment's not as good as a Hendrick car or a Gibbs car. But maybe speak to, the deficits that you as a driver face against someone like myself, in, information that you get, sim time. Like, talk to us about what do the top drivers get versus what someone like you at Front Row gets as far as resources, like beyond just the race car.
Yeah, so I think that, I haven't been in your shoes, so I don't know. You'll have to tell me how much more you get. But most of the pre-race preparation, as far as what to study, what to look at, restarts, who is the best, who is the worst, all that, I do that myself. I don't have an engineer that's bringing that to me and say, hey, I need you to look at the 99 this week because he was the best last year. I go through that data and that SMT and that video and find who is the best restarter. And,
That's right.
And so because our guys are building shocks and trying to get to the racetrack, I don't have somebody dedicated to that. As far as the simulation goes, we have a great partnership with Ford Performance, and we get DIL time, and we're on the driving simulator, but our session's Thursday. Car's already loaded up.
That's right.
It's on the hauler. It was in the Indy parade when I was finishing up, And so for us, we can learn, but there's only so much you can do at the track. You might adjust a few heights, you might do a few things, little tweaks, but building your model needs to happen several weeks before, and that's hard for us to do because we're just trying to keep our head above water. And so some of those things are a challenge, but at the same time, it's what's kept me super engaged. I don't have a choice.
Yep.
Like if I don't do it, it's not going to get done. And that's been good for me because it's kept me locked in, but it's also kept me a part of how to get better myself, and how to look at it myself and make sure that I'm doing all the things that I need to do to execute at a high level. And, it's like you said, it's not about just having great equipment. Yesterday I had great equipment. I think my car was better than yours, right?
No question.
And I believe that, but there's so much more that I need to do to be able to capitalize on that moment. And that's what I've always been super impressed with. And I talked to you about this before, is that guys that execute at a high level and do it week in, week out, it's so hard to do. I mean, you can have the best car, but to do what Ty Gibbs did on Saturday, it's still hard to do. He had a dominant car, but you still got to execute. You still got to do everything right. And it's not as easy as it looks. So it was fun to be in that situation and kind of have that pressure on you to do it. And you prepare for it, but you don't know if you're going to buckle, right? You don't know if you're going to buckle under the pressure or not.
Yeah, I mean, it is a challenge, and I think that's really where I had an advantage on the field. Now, this is the total guess, but I think that I got into data and analytics on the driving side really, really early. And then it's, all the big teams have it now, like you talked about. Chevy has their program that they're teaching the drivers, what to look for, where you're saying is that, man, I have to dig up all the data myself, and then I go through it and look at it and figure out where can I get better. And so, I mean, drivers are still the number one X factor, no matter how you break it down in the car's performance. And I know how it made me feel, and it's got to make you feel very gratified to see the results from the work that you put in.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's fun, and it's fun to be a part of it. I mean, I have a great spot at Front Row because I get to be in most of the decision making, which is fun. I'm not an owner. I'm not a manager, but I have the freedom to do a lot of things in regards to development, in regards to people and who we put in place and what needs to happen, and I enjoy that aspect of it.
Michael McDowell defied the odds and put himself in the playoff picture. What people don't know is that knocked my 23 car out of the owner's playoffs. Now, Bubba's in it, but we're not in 2311. And so I actually talked a little bit with the contractor who's building our building, and he says, wait a minute, I'm trying to figure this out. So how are you X amount of points behind in owners and X amount in drivers? And I'm like, yeah, I'm only 30 behind in the owners championship for the regular season, but I'm 55, 60 behind in drivers. And he's like, I said, because I got a penalty because of my podcast earlier this year. So there is a opportunity where I win the championship for the 11 team and I don't win a championship again. Like, it would just be poetic and perfect. But so what people don't know is the 9 car is actually in right now on the owner's side. I'm trying to get it pulled up here.
This is all very interesting because I feel like
he wanted me to explain. He's like, I don't understand who's in, who's out. Like, it's not really being talked about that much. So
right.
Bubba is, okay, I'm going to try to do it on the fly here. Bubba is in on drivers currently, out on owners. The 9 car is out on drivers, in on owners. And then what's different? What am I missing?
The 48's closer to being in on owners than they are on drivers. But you're still ahead of them.
Correct. Yeah, it's still, I think he's got probably 30, man, that's uneducated, but 30 or so on the 48 team, maybe less after this week.
And at the top, you're closer to Truex for the regular season championship on owners than
yeah, so we
drivers.
could end up with, best case scenario, if I gain 30 on Truex over the next 2 weeks, then we could end up with more bonus points on the owner side than I have on the driver side. So that was a scenario that actually played out for the first time last year with the Hendrick team where Kyle Larson's car, if I remember right,
yep.
Kyle Larson's car was eligible for the owner's championship at Phoenix last year. So he was still racing for, and by the way, that's how we get paid as ownership is by the owner's points because it makes it to where if Michael gets sick or something like that or has an injury, or he's able to, that team doesn't get penalized monetarily because of that. So that's the right way to do it. The drivers, of course, get all the fame, but as the owners, I'm going, oh no, ouch. So we got to get Bubba in. He needs to win or gain a bunch of points on one of those guys. I think it's probably the 9 car that's the next ahead of him on owners. So it is very difficult sometimes to understand. I think sometimes we get guilty of kind of getting too inside baseball here where we just talk about something that, we expect the fans to understand, but don't. So we need to break it down, but we'll update that as over the next 2 weeks. But
it's fascinating because last year this discussion came up with the Kurt Busch situation, right? That he was going to miss the playoffs or he was going to be out for the playoffs, but the car was still in. So you had Bubba drive the 45 for a handful of races. And it was like, well, this doesn't really ever happen. We don't ever have a guy that's not in the driver's championship racing for the owner's championship. And now this year with all the penalties and people out of the race car, it's just...
Yeah, it's been wild. And like Denny said, it's the same. Even though it's the driver's championship, I don't get paid because the owners don't get paid if you don't make the owner's championship. And so the drivers is what's highlighted, but the owners is what matters for the historical, for years moving on and the value of it. So yesterday was a big win for us in that regard because even if I would have pointed my way in on the driver's side, we weren't going to point our way in on the owner's side. It was too big of a gap.
That's a good point.
So it was a big plus for us and for being a smaller team, like what it does for you for the next few years by making the playoffs is super important.
Yeah, because Bob's just going to reinvest whatever that gain is in either your year-end point fund or wherever his charter ends up netting out at the end of the season. These guys, they reinvest. They don't just these team owners don't put money in their pockets. I can assure you that.
If I do my job well, we'll have a Hawkeye before the end of the year. If I do it well, that's the plan. That's the goal. He'll be here Wednesday, so I'm going to wear him out.
So I'll take it down to 6th grade level. He just said we'll have a Hawkeye by the end of the year. The fact that y'all don't have a Hawkeye is amazing. Right?
Yeah.
It's absolutely amazing. It's a Hawkeye is essentially the device that scans the car, and it makes sure that the outer body of the car and the underbody of the car is legal. So it's just versus you saw back in Days of Thunder when they put the old aluminum plate on top of the car and it fit the template. Everywhere that piece wasn't touching, the teams would twist or move and gain an aero advantage. You have to have a Hawkeye to get all the advantages out of your car. It's just a fact. I mean, one of the last things they do before they load in a hauler is run it right back through the Hawkeye after they set up the car, How does it, fit the Hawkeye? It's such an important part. And not only that, is the teams have to offset what their Hawkeye says versus what NASCAR Hawkeye says. So it really is amazing that y'all are doing what you're doing, again, with the resources. And let's not downplay anything, too. They do have a great team at Front Row. They've got good people there, and, you don't continue to overachieve. Eventually, you just got to recognize this team is actually pretty good.
For sure.
Right?
And it's not like we don't have access to a Hawkeye. I don't want to paint that picture. We can use NASCAR's Hawkeye, which is tough because it's a schedule. Xfinity guys, there's a lot of people that are trying to get in there. But we also have our alliance with Roush Fenway, Keselowski Racing, right? And so we have a time slot there to run both cars through the Hawkeye, which is great. And we have to be at this level, you got to do it. The thing that's tough is that we don't get to fine tune and tweak, go back through, fine tune and tweak, go back through, because it's not in our shops, not in our building. So our guys are doing a great job. But if they had 2 days and they could just go back and forth, in and out, we'd be able to maximize it so much more. And we'd probably get through tech the first time instead of having to go through 2 or 3 times like we do now. Because like Denny said, it doesn't always correlate from the track to the shop. So it's a process.